The wind moved slowly across the quiet military cemetery. Flags waved half-mast under the gray morning sky. Rows of white stones stretched endlessly, each one carrying a name, a story, and a sacrifice. The sound of boots echoed on the ground as soldiers prepared for the funeral of one of the nation's most respected heroes, General Marcus Harlow. Before we dive into the video, please subscribe our channel. Everyone was focused, serious, and dressed in perfect uniform. No one spoke. The air carried a mix of honor and sadness, and then a strange sound broke the silence. A soft tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of a wooden cane touching the pavement. Slowly, an old man appeared from the mist near the cemetery gate. His hair was silver white, his face wrinkled and tired. But his eyes were sharp, filled with something deep. In his hand, he held a single red poppy flower. He walked with care, each step heavy, like it carried years of pain and memories. The soldiers standing at the gate turned their heads. "Sir, this area is restricted," one guard said firmly. "You can't go in. The general's funeral is private." The old man stopped. He looked at the guard for a moment, then at the open field where people were gathering near the coffin draped with the national flag. "I know," he said softly. "That's why I came." The guards looked at each other. One of them frowned. "You were invited?" The old man didn't answer. He just stood there, holding the red poppy close to his chest. "Sir, please step aside. The ceremony is about to begin," the second guard said. The old man's lips trembled. His voice was low, almost breaking. "He would have wanted me there," he said. The guard crossed his arms. "Who would have wanted you there?" The old man's answer was a whisper. "The general." The guards exchanged confused looks. They didn't recognize him. He wasn't wearing a uniform. His clothes were old, a simple navy coat over a faded shirt. To them, he looked like just another old civilian trying to sneak into a military event. "Sir, please don't make this difficult," one guard said sharply. "We can't let you in without proper clearance." The old man's eyes lowered. He took a deep breath. "I promised him I'd come," he murmured. One of the younger soldiers watching nearby shook his head. "Probably just another veteran wanting attention," he whispered to his friend. But the old man didn't move. His hands tightened around the cane. He stared beyond the guards toward the coffin resting under the open tent. The air grew colder. The crowd began to gather. Cameras clicked. Officers in shining medals took their places. But still the old man stood outside the gate, silent, waiting. Finally, one of the guards lost patience. "Sir, I'm sorry, but you'll have to leave." The old man looked at him quietly. There was no anger in his eyes, only sadness. "I've already left once," he said slowly. "This time I came back." The guard frowned. "What do you mean?" But the old man didn't reply. He turned slightly, his gaze fixed on the folded flags near the front. He whispered something under his breath, words that only the wind could hear. A young officer noticed him and walked over. "Is there a problem here?" "Yes, sir," said the guard. "This man says he knows the general." The officer glanced at the old man, studying his face. "You knew General Harlow?" The old man nodded slowly. "Yes, long before he was a general." The officer's expression changed, part confusion, part disbelief. "And who exactly are you?" The old man's eyes lifted toward the sky as if searching for an answer there. "Just someone who made him a promise." The officer hesitated. The old man's tone wasn't demanding. It wasn't proud. It was heavy, the kind of voice that carried truth. But the rules were rules. "I'm sorry, sir," the officer said firmly. "We can't allow unauthorized guests. Please move aside." The old man gave a small nod. "I understand." He turned away slowly, his cane clicking against the stones. But as he began to leave, the young officer noticed something shining under the man's coat. It caught the light for just a second, a metal, old and worn. The officer stepped closer, but the man was already walking away. The officer called out, "Wait!" The old man stopped. The wind picked up, brushing against the poppy in his hand. The officer spoke again. "Where did you get that medal?" The old man looked over his shoulder. "Where we all got them," he said quietly. "Where men stop being afraid." Then he walked a few more steps and stopped again, his voice softer now, full of memory. "I never thought I'd outlive him." The young officer didn't know what to say. Something about the man's words felt true. The guard whispered, "Maybe we should check the guest list again." But before they could, the horns began to play. The funeral was starting. The old man stood near the fence, gripping the bars, watching as soldiers carried the coffin wrapped in the flag. Every movement was precise, every salute sharp. The crowd rose in silence. The old man's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't cry. He simply whispered, "Goodbye, my boy." None of the soldiers near him understood why he said that. But deep inside, he remembered the sound of gunfire, the young face of a soldier under his command, and the promise he made on a battlefield long ago. If I live and you don't, I'll see you home. And now he was here to keep that promise. The guard stood still, unsure whether to stop him again or let him stay. Something in the air felt different, as if the wind itself carried respect. As the coffin was lowered, the old man lifted the red poppy to his chest and whispered, "For you, son." No one knew who he was. No one understood why he cared so much, but soon they would, because this was no ordinary old man, and General Marcus Harlow was no ordinary soldier. The truth behind them both was about to change everything. The funeral band's music faded slowly into the wind. The old man still stood outside the gate, his hand holding the cold metal bars. His eyes followed the flag-covered coffin as it rested near the memorial platform. The soldiers inside stood tall, proud, and unaware that just a few steps away, a forgotten hero watched them silently. The guards at the gate whispered to each other, still unsure what to do. The older guard, Sergeant Miller, shook his head. "He's probably just some confused veteran." "Happens all the time," he said. But the younger guard, Private Lewis, couldn't look away. "Sir, did you see that medal he had?" he asked quietly. Miller shrugged. "A lot of guys have medals. Doesn't mean he knew the general personally." Lewis frowned. Something about the old man felt different. There was a calmness in his eyes. Not the kind of sadness you see in strangers, but the deep silence of someone carrying old memories. Inside the cemetery, the general's family had arrived. Cameras flashed. Officers gave commands. The sound of marching boots filled the air again. Still, the old man didn't move. He stood straight now, his shoulders pulled back, like an invisible command had been given. The way he stood, it wasn't the stance of an ordinary visitor. It was military, strong, disciplined. Even with the cane in his hand, he looked like a man who once led others into fire. Finally, the officer from before, Captain Rhodes, returned to the gate. "Why are you still here, sir?" he asked, trying to sound polite but firm. The old man's answer was simple. "Because I should be there," he said, pointing toward the funeral. Captain Rhodes sighed. "You don't understand. This ceremony is for close friends and family. Only invited guests." The old man's eyes narrowed. "And who decides who his friends were?" Rhodes hesitated. "His service record, his staff, the department." The old man interrupted softly. "Paper never knows a man's heart." The captain blinked, caught off guard by the words. "Sir, please, I'm just doing my duty." The old man nodded slowly. "Yes, duty. I know what that means." The silence that followed felt heavy. The captain wanted to ask more, but before he could, another officer approached. "Captain Rhodes!" a stern voice called. It was Colonel Grant, the officer overseeing the ceremony. His uniform was crisp, his medals shining in the dull light. "What's going on here?" Rhodes stood straight. "Sir, this man insists he knows General Harlow. He's trying to enter the ceremony without clearance." The colonel turned his sharp gaze toward the old man. "Name?" The old man's voice was low but steady. "Samuel Reed." Colonel Grant frowned, flipping through a list in his hand. "You're not on the guest list." "I know," the old man said. "Then why are you here?" The old man looked at the coffin again. "Because I gave him my word." Colonel Grant's jaw tightened. "Mr. Reed, this is an official military event. If you don't have clearance, you cannot stay." The old man's hand trembled slightly on the cane, but his voice didn't break. "Do you remember what they said about promises, Colonel?" Grant raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "A man's worth," the old man continued, "isn't written on paper or stitched on his uniform. It's remembered by those who stood beside him when the world went silent." The colonel shifted uncomfortably. "Enough of this," he said sharply. "Escort him out." Two guards stepped forward. Private Lewis looked uncertain. "Sir, he isn't causing trouble." "Do as I said," Colonel Grant snapped. Lewis swallowed and nodded. He stepped toward the old man. "Sir, please, don't make this harder." He stepped toward the old man. "Sir, please, don't make this harder." The old man looked into his eyes and smiled faintly. "Son, I've seen harder." The guards reached for his arm, but he didn't resist. He simply looked past them, watching the flag flutter above the coffin. His eyes grew wet, but he blinked back the tears. "I only wanted to say goodbye," he whispered. Private Lewis froze. The softness in the old man's voice felt like something sacred. "Goodbye?" he asked quietly. The old man nodded. "He was my boy once." The words struck Lewis like a wave. "Your boy?" he repeated, confused. The old man smiled sadly. "Not by blood, but by war," Colonel Grant frowned. "Enough of this nonsense! Get him out!" The guards began to lead him away. But just then, a group of older veterans walked by the gate, wearing medals and hats from different wars. One of them stopped and looked at the old man closely. "Wait a second," the veteran muttered. His voice trembled. Sam Reed." The old man turned his head. "George?" Colonel Grant looked between them, confused. "You know this man?" The veteran nodded quickly. "Know him?" "Sir, everyone in the 31st Infantry knew Sam Reed. He was our sergeant in '69, saved an entire unit during the Black Ridge mission." Private Lewis blinked. "Black Ridge? That was one of the deadliest battles of the war." The colonel's expression changed. "That can't be true. Sergeant Samuel Reed was reported missing in action." The old man gave a small smile. "That's what they told my family, too." The crowd near the gate began to whisper. Some of the younger soldiers looked at him in disbelief. Could it really be him? The man from the stories they read in their training books? Colonel Grant cleared his throat. "Even if that's true, this is still a private ceremony." George, the veteran, stepped forward. "With respect, sir, if this man wants to say goodbye to General Harlow, you let him. The general would have wanted that." Colonel Grant looked uneasy. The situation was growing complicated. He didn't want to cause a scene. "I can't," he began, but George cut him off. "Sir, that old man carried Harlow out of fire when the whole valley was burning. He's not just a guest. He's the reason the general lived." The colonel's face went pale. He turned toward the old man, who stood quietly, not boasting, not defending himself, just waiting. "Is that true?" the colonel asked softly. The old man nodded once. "He was young then, braver than most. I told him if we ever made it home, I'd be there when his time came." A deep silence fell over them all. Colonel Grant's voice lowered. "Why didn't you say so before?" The old man gave a weary smile. "You didn't ask." For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind blew gently through the flags again. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of a bugle echoed. Private Lewis finally said what everyone felt. "Sir, he belongs here." The colonel looked around. The guards, the crowd, the veterans. Then he sighed. "Let him stay, but stand at the back." The old man nodded gratefully. "Thank you." He stepped past the gate at last. Each step was slow but steady. He wasn't looking for attention, applause, or forgiveness. He was there for one thing only, to keep his promise. As he walked toward the ceremony, every eye followed him. Some saluted quietly without knowing why. Others whispered his name like it was a legend coming to life. But none of them knew that the most powerful moment of all was still to come, when the general himself would see him. And when that moment came, nothing at that funeral would ever be the same again. The air around the cemetery had changed. When the old man, Sergeant Samuel Reed, finally stepped through the gate, the crowd grew silent. It was as if something unseen had entered with him. The soldiers didn't know why, but they stood a little straighter. The veterans nearby took off their hats. Samuel walked slowly, his cane pressing against the path, the red poppy still in his hand. He stopped near the last row of seats, far behind everyone else. He didn't need to be close. He only needed to be there. The general's coffin rested under the tent, covered in the national flag. Officers stood at attention. The honor guard held their rifles, waiting for the signal. But Samuel's eyes weren't on the coffin. They were on the man standing near it, a tall figure in a dark uniform, a face that seemed familiar, even after all these years. General Marcus Harlow. He looked older, stronger, and far more decorated than the young soldier Samuel once knew. But those eyes, the same eyes that once stared at death and refused to give up, hadn't changed. Samuel's heart pounded. He's alive. He made it home. But the general hadn't seen him yet. A soft murmur passed through the crowd. Some people whispered about the strange old man who had almost been turned away. A few even pointed discreetly. The guards, who had denied him, now stood awkwardly in silence, unsure whether to apologize or stay still. Private Lewis, standing near the front, kept glancing back at Samuel. The old man's presence bothered him. Not in a bad way, but in a mysterious one. He couldn't stop thinking about the words Samuel had said earlier. "I only wanted to say goodbye. He was my boy once. Not by blood, but by war." What did that mean? Lewis couldn't focus on the ceremony. His eyes kept darting between the general and the old man. Something deep inside him told him there was more to this story, something no one else knew. As the speeches began, Samuel stood in silence. The sound of the chaplain's voice blended with the wind. But Samuel wasn't listening. He was somewhere else, in another time, another place. His fingers tightened around the cane, and his mind began to drift. The year was long ago. The air was filled with smoke, dust, and fear. Gunfire echoed across the valley known as Black Ridge. Sergeant Samuel Reed crouched behind a burned-out jeep, shouting orders. "Move! Get those men behind the ridge!" A young voice shouted back. "Sir! Private Harlow's still out there." Samuel turned. In the distance, through the smoke, he saw a young soldier, barely 20, pinned down behind a fallen tree. Bullets tore through the air around him. It was Marcus Harlow. Without thinking, Samuel ran forward. The world blurred around him, the sound of explosions, screams, and gunfire mixing into one heartbeat of chaos. He reached Harlow, grabbed him by the vest, and yelled, "You're not dying today, kid!" A grenade went off nearby, throwing dirt and fire into the air. Samuel shielded Harlow with his own body, dragging him back toward safety. His leg burned. A piece of shrapnel had hit him, but he didn't stop. "Stay with me," Samuel shouted. "You want to live? Then fight for it!" Harlow nodded weakly, blood on his cheek, fear in his eyes. Together, they crawled through the mud until the firing faded. When they finally reached the others, Samuel collapsed. The world turned black. He remembered the last thing he heard before passing out. Harlow's voice, breaking through the chaos. "I won't forget this, Sergeant. I swear I won't forget." Back to present, Samuel's eyes opened. He was back at the funeral, the sound of the chaplain's prayer pulling him from the past. He breathed heavily, clutching the cane like it was a rifle. The memories still hurt. The leg that once bled on that battlefield now trembled from age. But it wasn't the pain of the wound that haunted him. It was the silence that followed after. Because after that day, no one ever told him what happened to Marcus Harlow. When Samuel finally woke up in a hospital tent, they told him his unit had been wiped out. His name was listed as missing in action. The war ended, but no one came for him. No medals, no letters, just silence. He had believed everyone, including Harlow, was gone. Until years later, when he saw a photograph in the newspaper. General Marcus Harlow, war hero promoted to 4-star general. That day, Samuel smiled through tears. The boy had lived, the boy had kept fighting, and now, he was gone. The chaplain's prayer ended, and the sound of rifles cracked in the distance. The traditional salute. 3 shots echoed through the sky. Samuel flinched slightly. His fingers gripped the poppy tighter. Private Lewis, standing nearby, finally gathered the courage to approach him. "Sir," he whispered. Samuel turned his head. "Yes, son? Were you really in Black Ridge?" Samuel's eyes drifted to the coffin. "I was. I stayed behind so others could get out." Lewis swallowed. "And General Harlow, he was one of them?" Samuel nodded slowly. "The best of them." Lewis hesitated. "Why didn't anyone know who you were?" Samuel gave a faint smile. "Because sometimes, son, history forgets the men who write it." The young soldier's throat tightened. "He would have wanted you here, sir." Samuel's eyes shimmered. "I think so too." The wind picked up again. A faint rumble of thunder rolled across the distance. The ceremony was nearing its end. But then, something strange happened. As the general stepped toward the podium to speak, he stopped. His hand resting on his cap froze. Slowly, his eyes scanned the crowd. Then they locked onto the back row, on the old man with the cane. For a long, silent moment, the world seemed to stop moving. General Harlow's lips parted slightly, his face pale. He blinked, once, twice, as if not believing what he was seeing. The officers around him noticed. One whispered, "Sir, are you all right?" But the general didn't answer. His hand trembled slightly as he whispered to himself, "No, it can't be. He's gone. He's gone." The chaplain looked confused. The soldiers looked at each other. The cameras kept flashing, but the general couldn't look away. His eyes filled with tears. Slowly, he whispered a name only he remembered. The name of the man who had saved him all those years ago. Sergeant Reed. The old man looked up. Their eyes met. For the first time in decades, the student saw his teacher, the soldier saw his savior, and the promise made on a bloody battlefield finally breathed again. The crowd had no idea what was happening, but they could feel it. The tension, the silence, the weight of something enormous hanging in the air. Something was about to happen, and when it did, it would stop the entire ceremony. The sky had turned darker, the clouds rolling in like a gray curtain above the cemetery. The soldiers stood still, rifles at their sides, the final prayer hanging in the air. General Marcus Harlow was no longer listening. His heart was pounding. His eyes were fixed on the old man standing alone at the back. He whispered again, "Sergeant Reed?" The chaplain paused, confused by the sudden break in the ceremony. Everyone turned toward the general. Cameras flashed. Whispers rippled through the crowd. The general stepped away from the podium. His officers tried to stop him. "Sir, the ceremony—" But he raised his hand sharply. "Hold." The entire place froze. He began walking, slowly, firmly, down the aisle between the rows of soldiers. The sound of his polished boots echoed with authority. No one dared to speak. Every eye followed him as he walked toward the old man who stood motionless, holding the single red poppy. Samuel Reed's heart trembled, but he didn't move. His old eyes shimmered with tears as the man he once saved came closer with every step. When the general reached him, he stopped only a few feet away. The two men looked at each other, one in full uniform, covered with stars and medals, the other in a simple coat, carrying memories heavier than any award. "Sergeant," the general said softly, his voice shaking, "I thought you were gone." Samuel smiled weakly. "You thought wrong, son." The general blinked back tears. "All these years, they told me you didn't make it. I looked for you." "I know," Samuel whispered. "But sometimes the war doesn't end for everyone." The silence around them deepened. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then, in front of hundreds of soldiers, officers, and civilians, General Marcus Harlow took a step back, lifted his trembling hand to his forehead, and gave the old man the highest salute a soldier could give. A gasp ran through the crowd. No one moved. The old man's eyes filled with tears. Slowly, painfully, he straightened his back and returned the salute. For a moment, it was as if time had gone backward. Two soldiers, not separated by age or rank, but standing once more on the same battlefield, bound by honor. The general's voice cracked as he spoke. "Everything I am, everything I became, is because of you, Sergeant Reed." Samuel lowered his hand, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, son. You made yourself who you are. I only showed you the way home." The general took the red poppy gently from Samuel's hand and placed it on the flag-draped coffin. "You kept your promise," he said quietly. Samuel nodded. "I always do." Tears glistened in the general's eyes. He turned to his soldiers and said, "Today we honor not just one man, but two. A general, and the soldier who made him one." The crowd stood and saluted. Every soldier in uniform raised their hand. Every veteran bowed their head. The sound of the wind carried a single phrase through the silence. Words Samuel had once said long ago. "Respect isn't about rank. It's about sacrifice." Samuel smiled, his eyes misty but peaceful. For the first time in decades, his heart felt light. As the final notes of the bugle played, he whispered softly, "Rest easy, my boy." The general turned. But the old man was no longer standing. His cane lay gently on the chair, the poppy gone from his hand. Only the wind moved now, carrying away the petals across the rows of white stones. Some say the general saw him one last time, standing tall, young again, in his old uniform, smiling before fading into the mist. And from that day on, every year at the ceremony, a single red poppy would appear on the general's grave, though no one ever saw who left it. No one ever saw who left it.